Venezuela and Colombia set up the Binational Macro-Business Roundtable to strengthen economic and trade relations. Indigenous people of Colombia developed a new date of indigenous demonstrations to reject act of violence by armed groups. Azerbaijan's government has confirmed at least 192 military deaths in its military offensive against Nagorno-Karabakh. Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm Ana Marrero from the teleSUR headquarters in Caracas, Venezuela. We'll begin with the news. Stay with us. Venezuela and Colombia set up the Binational Macro-Business Roundtable with the aim of strengthening economic and trade relations. During the event, the delegations of both countries signed a memorandum of understanding to deepen the process of trade integration as a support of peace in the region. The Colombian Trade Minister, Germán Umaña, said that the balance of the first year of the reopening is positive and that the implementation of the agreements boosts bilateral trade. The Executive Vice President Delcy Rodriguez stressed that the Colombia-Venezuela Binational Macro-Roundtable seeks to generate opportunities for the integration and development in the different strategic sectors of the economy of both countries.
To think that our destinies are unavoidably united, tied together. That those expressions that for 7 years kept the border closed because of a hatred, intolerance, political and moral degradation of some rulers, such as Iván Duque, have no place in the future of Colombia and Venezuela. The only thing that has a place is hope, that there is only room for complementarity, the shared development of our peoples.
The Executive Vice President of Venezuela, Delcy Rodriguez, also recalled that a year ago the President of Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro, and the President of Colombia, Gustavo Petro, reopened the binational border after 7 years of being closed.
And 7 years later, President Nicolás Maduro, President Gustavo Petro, brave presidents, took a strategic and historic step. Both added their wills and commitments with the people of Venezuela, with the people of Colombia, and gave a historical opening to our borders. Dear Ambassador Milton Rengifo, they also gave a spiritual opening because it was the desire of the peoples of Colombia and Venezuela.
On the other hand, Delcy Rodriguez affirmed that the trade agreement signed by both nations in 2011 does not address the economic blockade imposed against her nation.
Unfortunately, the agreement that governed our trade was completely outdated on the Venezuelan side. It had been signed in 2011, September 2011. Minister Romagna, you are a scholar of binational trade, and you know that this agreement did not show the reality that our country is living today, the terrible economic aggression of a blockade illegally and illegitimately imposed by the government of the United States and satellite countries.
Also, Colombia's Minister of Commerce, Industry and Tourism, Germán Umaña, said that this action is part of the agenda for the recovery of the institutions and the reactivation of diplomatic relations.
But we did it in 8 days, and the Vice President solved the last part, the 42.5%, in 5 minutes in the negotiations. And it was decided by the 2 foreign ministries to recover the institutionality. It seems easy to say, but we recovered the dialogue. We were not even talking to each other, and on August 7, President Petro, President Maduro, opened diplomatic relations, and we started talking again. And it was easy to talk. We were the same. We were the same as 7 years ago, when the borders between Colombia and Venezuela had been shamefully closed.
During his speech, the executive president of the Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean, Sergio Diaz Granados, emphasized the importance of generating opportunities for dialogue and negotiation to strengthen relations of cooperation.
As the ambassador said in his opening remarks, we are fraternal countries, we're friends, we're neighbors, and we have a common history and very deep ties that we must continue to foster permanently. So from the bank and as a Colombian, I must also say that it gives me great satisfaction and joy to be part of this opportunity for negotiation and dialogue that will certainly help strengthen cooperation in the economic, commercial, industrial, and service fields.
Indigenous peoples of Colombia developed a new date of indigenous demonstrations to reject acts of violence by armed groups and promote a reform launched by President Gustavo Petro. The demonstrations began at 9 a.m. local time in downtown Bogotá. Around 13,000 indigenous people from more than 10 departments of the country are mobilizing to support the peace talks and reject threats, homicides, displacements, and kidnapping by irregular armed groups in their ancestral territories. On the other hand, indigenous leaders are expected to meet with President Gustavo Petro on September 28th to address several issues. While the mobilizations by indigenous peoples in rejection of violence continue in Colombia, President Gustavo Petro called for a simultaneous mobilization in favor of peace. The Colombian president urged citizens to take to the streets for peace, life, and social justice. Thus, thousands of people from different parts of the country gathered in the streets of Bogotá in response to the call for peace. Russia made a food donation to Cuba on Wednesday through the World Food Program at a time when both countries are strengthening their cooperation and bilateral relations. It is a bunch of 650 tons of vitamins, sunflower oils, a donation from the Russian Ministry of Civil Protection's Emergency and Elimination of the Consequences of Disaster, thanks to the cooperation of the UN's World Food Program. According to the information provided by the international program in the period of 2022-2023, Russia, through different agencies, has provided a fund for the WFP in Cuba for more than $4.5 million of funds designated to contribute to the food and nutritional security of the most vulnerable people on the island and to respond to the emergency situations.
Cuba and Russia are living today under the sanction regime from the collective West. But we Cubans, as well as Russians, know how to fight. We know how to overcome difficulties, and we know how to win.
Let's take a very first break, but remember you can now join us on our TikTok account as teleSUR English, where you'll be able to see news in different formats, news updates, and more. Stay tuned for more news. Welcome back to From the South. In Spain, far-right candidate for the Popular Party, Alberto Núñez Feijóo, failed to obtain an absolute majority to be sworn in as Prime Minister on the first ballot. On Wednesday, after concluding the last day of debate in the plenary session of the Congress, it was confirmed that Feijóo failed to be sworn in as a Prime Minister of Spain after obtaining 178 votes against him. After announcing the results, Congress indicated that a new vote will be held on Friday. If Feijóo does not get the necessary support, the King Felix VI will choose another candidate. Experts said that the incumbent Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez, who has won the support of multiple formations, could become the other chosen candidate.
The result of the vote was as follows. Votes cast 350, votes in favor of the candidate 172, votes against the candidate 178, abstentions 0. Ladies and gentlemen, the proposed candidate, not having reached the absolute majority, submits the same proposal to a new vote 48 hours after the previous one in accordance with the provisions of Articles 99.3 of the Constitution.
A group of Catholic Church abuse victims under the advocate on Wednesday called on Pope Francis to enforce zero tolerance against Cyril's clerical sexual abuse after completing a 6-day pilgrimage to Rome carrying a large wooden cross. The 10 men and a woman walk 130 kilometers along the last stretch of the Via Francigena, a medieval road that connects Canterbury, England to Rome. The demonstration coincides with the opening of the Synod of Bishops scheduled for October the 4th. The sexual abuse and cover-up scandals have shattered the reputation of the Catholic Church, posed a major challenge to the Pope, who has approved a series of measures in holding the Church heritage more accountable with mixed results.
We just want the Vatican, we want church leaders to hear this and be part of the conversation as they go into the Synod, that this is a worldwide problem and that worldwide there needs to be zero tolerance of sex abuse of children, and there needs to be the protection of lay people and clergy who speak out. Their reputations and their jobs need to be protected, and it should be in canon law.
In Australia, homelessness is on the rise, with a growing number of people ailing to benefit from the nation's green economy, as its rate is to mark a record 26 years without a recession. The unprecedented economic expansion, fueled by a massive mining investments boom, has boosted house prices and benefited some. But it has also led to the country's biggest cities, Sydney and Melbourne, being ranked second and 10th on the list of the world's east favorable housing. The surging prices have placed further pressure on those already struggling to afford a roof over their heads, with a public outcry on housing affordability, sparking action by federal and state government to fund more social and expensive residential projects.
We think that homelessness is increasing in Sydney and Melbourne is due to the lack of affordable housing. In Sydney, for example, in New South Wales, there's a 60,000 strong waiting list for social housing, and the private rental market is just really unaffordable for people on income support.
Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu highlighted the high pace of production demonstrated by the tactical missile cooperation. At the same time, he expressed the pace of production to increase further in certain areas. Shoigu noted that KTF cooperation is developing modern aviation weapons, including high-precision ones. In addition, the meeting is expected to address the issue of support as well as ways to solve financial problems to the State Defense Order. Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has offered official apologies on behalf of his government for the standing ovation given last week to the Ukrainian Navy veteran during a session of the House of Commons of Parliament in the presence of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. He also announced that he will deliver a speech to the lower house on the issue.
In moments, I will address the House in front of all Canadians, in front of Jewish people here and around the world, and Ukrainians, to offer Parliament's unreserved apologies for what happened on Friday. The Speaker was solely responsible for the invitation and recognition of this man, and has wholly accepted that responsibility and stepped down. This was a mistake that has deeply embarrassed Parliament and Canada. All of us who were in this House on Friday regret deeply having stood and clapped, even though we did so unaware of the context. It was a horrendous violation of the memory of the millions of people who died in the Holocaust, and it was deeply, deeply painful for Jewish people. It also hurt Polish people, Roma people, 2S LGBTQI+ people, disabled people, racialized people, and the many millions who were targeted by the Nazi genocide.
teleSUR English launched its own video on-demand site for you to go and revisit our interviews, top stories, special broadcasts, and more. Just go to the top left corner in our website homepage and click on the video option to access our VOD platform. Now, let's take our last break. Don't go away. Welcome back. Azerbaijan's government has confirmed at least 192 military deaths in its military offensive against Nagorno-Karabakh. The conflict lasted about 24 hours and ended with a ceasefire and a process of integration of the territory in Azerbaijan. The Ministry of Health of that country has indicated among the fatalities there are 180 members of the Ministry of Defense, 12 members of the Ministry of Interior, and 1 civilian. Gabon's military installed Prime Minister Raymond Sima on Wednesday outlined plans for a national dialogue to be organized next year, which will pave the way for drawing up of a new constitution. Nearly a month after the military leaders ousted President Ali Bongo after 14 years of the helms of the oil-rich country, Sima told a press conference that an appeal for the contributions towards the dialogues will go out for next week. Cuba leader General Bryce Oligod Nguema, who has swiftly served as a transitional president, has promised to hand back the country to civilian rule with elections after a transitional period.
From my point of view, the national dialogue could take place between April and June in this area. Everyone has something to say. Men, women, old people, young people, people in housing states, people in towns, people in villages. Everyone has an opinion, and that's normal. So, starting next week, I'm going to put out a call for contributions. Why do we have a limited time to do this? Because we can't go on forever in a transition situation with a military command. We are a civil society. We belong to institutional bodies, and we have to respect the clauses of these bodies.
From Damascus, capital of Syria, the Palestinian refugees raised their voices in defense of rights under the fellow citizens held in Israeli occupation prisons. Together with their Syrian brothers, they call for gathered actions by the world community in order to put an end to the criminal practices of the Zionist occupation regime against Palestinian presidents. He tells in the following report with Hisham Wanus.
Representatives of the Palestinian factions, organizations, and national forces based in Syria gathered in front of the United Nations headquarters in Damascus to demand an immediate intervention of the world community and international organizations to save the lives of their imprisoned brothers who suffered the terrorist practices and violations of the Israeli prison authorities and are paying a high price for facing this brutal occupation.
On behalf of all Palestinian women, we express our solidarity with our prisoners in the occupied Palestine and ratify that we will continue to struggle until the release and until the expulsion of the Zionist occupier, expressing our attachment to the land of our ancestors without giving up and entering the Palestinian land, and that we will follow the example of our prisoners until the liberation and recovery of all the soil of our Palestinian homeland.
Estamos aquí para hacer llegar la voz de nuestros prisioneros al mundo y para ratificar.
We are here to make the voice of our prisoners heard by the whole world and to ratify our support for their determination to reach their freedom and to assure that we will not stop fighting until our return to our Palestinian homeland. And through this sit-in, we use the diplomatic channels to send a message to the United Nations and the world community to ask them to assume their responsibilities to stop the Israeli criminal practices against the prisoners and to release our imprisoned brothers.
Y para poner en libertad a nuestros hermanos encarcelados.
In a letter delivered to the UN representative in Syria, the protesters denounced the tragic conditions of the imprisoned Palestinians and the systematic methods of physical and psychological torture, led by solitary confinement and the prohibition of family visits, lack of medical care and basic needs, including food and clothing.
I send warm greetings to our compatriots in the occupied Palestine, to our prisoners in the occupation jails, and to the memory of our martyrs who fell in defense of Palestine. And from here we ratify our support to their struggle, persistence, and determination.
We call the United Nations and the world community to assume their moral and human responsibility towards our prisoners, towards the administrative detainees held in the prisons of the occupied territories without charge or trial, not because they have committed criminal offenses, but because they fight for our right to liberate Palestine and to live in peace in our occupied land.
The Zionist occupation forces currently holds behind bars almost 5,000 Palestinians, including 37 women and 175 minors, prisoners that their compatriots inside and outside the occupied territories, together with their resistance bloc allies, put all their efforts to set them free from the clutches of the occupying forces, who, taking advantage of the world's silence, subject them to the most extreme and inhuman treatment.
Hisham News, teleSUR, Damascus, Syria.
We have come to the end of this news brief, but you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also use us on our socials. We're on Facebook, on X, and on Instagram as well. For teleSUR English and from the South, I'm Ana Marrero. Thank you for watching.